Sony finally listened and ended one of the biggest PS5 scams on the entire PlayStation Store. And it's official, devs prefer PS Plus to Game Pass. And then I've got a news story about how people are fed up with bad game performance, but you shouldn't take it as far as these people. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. And yeah, we've got some great PS5 news to cover today, and most of it is positive, which is awesome. We don't have any of the crazy stuff going on in our world that's happening in the world of Xbox, where there's like studio closures, mass layoffs, arguments over whether or not Game Pass is profitable, that, you know, it's just like crazy stuff going on all the time. We are focused on games here, which is what the first news story is about. It's about ending a huge scam on the PlayStation Store that I have complained about multiple times over the past couple of years. So let me paint the picture for you. There's a new game on Steam like Repo. The genre that I saw on Twitter is friend slop. And if you don't have a PC, these are games like Pilgrim, Peak, Lethal Company, where it's usually 4 players. It has proximity chat. There's a goal like filling a cart with enough items to add up to a certain amount of money. And usually there's a monster chasing you throughout each and every level that you can't beat. A Repo is the best one because it has mechanics outside of just running away and or dying. And then if you lose, you start all over. And it provides funny bits with your friends and everything. And you know, these games come out, they're like $5 or $6, maybe even up to $10. They do great for a couple of weeks. Everyone falls off because they get bored or something. Then a few weeks later, there's a new one of these games that pops up on Steam that was thrown together in a month or two, and the cycle begins anew. Now, every time that happens, people obviously want to play these games on PS5 because they're the hot new thing, and they're not available on PS5 because they're thrown together so quickly for Steam. So this company, Publish Me Agency Limited, has basically made a huge scam where anytime one of these games pops off, they very quickly throw together their own version of the game that has a very similar art style, uses similar names. If you ever went to Blockbuster as a kid, if you like when Snakes on a Plane came out, there was Snakes on a Train, or like when Jurassic Park came out, there was like Cretaceous Creatures or something like that. You know, the Asylum is the company that would make all these movies. They'd throw them together really quickly. They'd have very similar art to trick you into renting them at Blockbuster instead of the movie you actually wanted. That's exactly what Publish Me Agency Limited is doing on the PlayStation Store. It happened with Repo. They made a game called like Report Agency or something like that. So you can see how people would get fooled into buying that instead of Repo. We probably wouldn't, but if it was like a parent of a kid who saw a game blowing up on TikTok like Repo and asked to get the game on their parents' credit card, it's the exact same scenario we went through back in the 90s on Friday nights when, you know, you could get your mom to rent you a movie at Blockbuster and bring home pizza. You ask for The Lost World Jurassic Park. She rushes through Blockbuster because she just worked a long day and she wants to get home. And then suddenly she has the Found City Cretaceous Camp or something like that. You know, it's like very similar, enough to trick your parent, but not the exact same thing. This has been going on for a while, and people were buying these games enough to push them up the PlayStation Store, which would then trick a lot of people. But the game that kind of blew up the entire thing spot was Schedule 1, which is like an open world drug dealing simulator. You've probably seen it. When that came out, there was a new version of it called like Weed Drug Empire from, of course, Publish Me Agency. And for some reason, that one got big enough to get the attention of all these journalists who write articles about this stuff. And a lot of people started asking questions like, why isn't Sony policing this more? Like, I get it. You want to have an open environment because that's how Steam works. Like, if you have Steam, you can actually turn off age filters, and there's a whole different Steam store than most people see, because if you make a new Steam account, the adult content features are usually ticked on. But if you turn that off, it totally changes Steam. Like, normally, if you look at the top 10 most bought games, it's like Steam Deck, Elden Ring Night Rain, a few other games that you've heard of like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, maybe Space Marine 2. But then if you turn off adult content warnings, then it's like Bunny Simulator 15. And that's what Sony's kind of building with the PlayStation Store. And Nintendo is also doing it with the Switch Store. Beat 'em Ups talks about this a lot. He calls them Luigi games. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So everyone was kind of asking why this is allowed, because it just clogs up the store and just lowers the barrier of quality, I would say, and the impression most people have of the PlayStation Store itself. It seems like thankfully Sony was paying attention to our complaints, because even though it took a little longer than it should, all of Publish Me Agency's games are taken down off the PlayStation Store. They're going to be back. They're going to come up with some new name, a new LLC publisher that's like, hey, if you can throw one of these games together in a weekend and be quick about it, we will get it on the PlayStation Store. So I think Sony needs to not really overhaul everything, because I think they could take it way too far, but you know, they could do a little bit more moderation and some checks and balances, or at least some investigations into these publishers who are signing up for dev accounts on the PlayStation Store, right? Like, I don't think that's too much to ask, and I don't think that really would have any adverse consequences, because when these games are allowed, but a game like Ready or Not has to be censored to be allowed on console stores, it just makes you look back and say, what are we doing here? Everyone waited so long for Ready or Not to come to PlayStation and of course Xbox, and then when it finally does, it's a censored version. Xbox apparently has the most stringent rules ever about how women specifically are portrayed on their storefronts, and that's a big reason why people think Stellar Blade isn't on Xbox. So like, that stuff's dumb. You shouldn't moderate it that hard. But when there's actual scams like Weed Drug Empire or Repossession Company or whatever it was called, that's the stuff they should be targeting, and they let that go, but they censor things like Ready. It's totally out of whack, and they need to fix it. I see why these games get bought. If you look at Lethal Company, you look at Repo, you look at Schedule 1, you look at something like Pilgrim or any of these games, they don't have the most like high-tech art styles ever. I think Pilgrim has the best art style of all the friend slop games because it has art direction. It's not just assets from an engine that you're using to build this game out. Like, it actually has a world and lore and everything, and that's why that one stuck with me. But then you look at a game like Phasmophobia, and it's like, yeah, this game's awesome, and it's cool that you can talk to the ghosts, but like, graphically speaking, it's not pushing the boundaries of the PlayStation 5, honestly. Like, let's be real here. It's doing just enough to be a game, and that's all it needs to be, because it's focusing on the actual gameplay and the fun, and that's why I like it. But that brings me to the second news story here, which of course is about PS Plus versus Game Pass, but developers seem to love PS Plus, and more developers are coming out against Game Pass. And this is something we've talked about for a while here on the channel. I just don't see how Game Pass really works. I have a little bit of a different knowledge base than a lot of people in the games industry, because I also cover a lot of movies, and I've lived through this. Like, when Netflix came about, it was amazing. It was at the beginning stages of Game Pass era, where like everything was on there. You were getting theatrical movies, full TV shows like Weeds or Dexter and everything. You could just watch them for free. And then as time went on and the studios got more and more greedy and said, well, if you want to keep The Office on your platform instead of waiting for us to make our own so we can remove it, give us $10 gazillion and we'll let it stay there. So then Netflix turned around and started just pumping out tons and tons and tons and tons of content. And that's about the beginning stages of where Xbox Game Pass is at. And if you look at movies, everyone's been trained by how quickly movies release on streaming services, how expensive going to the movies is, to just wait until it's free to watch. And that's basically killing the entire movie industry, because if you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on movies, you can't recoup it through people spending $7 or $10 a month for a subscription service. There just aren't enough people doing it to actually make up for the value that's lost. So there's a lot of arguments going on because of Chris Dring, whose podcast is awesome. It's called The Game Business. It's sponsored by Jeff Keighley, but he basically brings someone on for a new business related topic every week, which is what I'm interested in. That's what I'm interested in movies as well. He basically said Xbox told him a couple of years ago that Game Pass is profitable if you don't count the first party games. So all of the budget they're spending on the most expensive games is not counted towards the overall spend on Game Pass, which, like, if you think about it from an accounting perspective, I can see why, because they're spending money on internal projects, which is an expense. They want to write that off no matter what, because it lowers the taxes the corporation has to pay. And then if they're going to outside studios and contracting them, that doesn't count as much as an expense, I guess. So it kind of makes sense on the one hand, but on the other hand, it doesn't really make sense. Then a few hours later, he reclarified that it is profitable now with first party games from what he's been told. But like we all know, Xbox speaks out of both sides of their mouth constantly. Their biggest problem is they talk too much. And on top of that, they can't talk their way out of the problem that huge people in the industry, like the founder of Arcane, were coming out and saying that the model is not sustainable and is not good for growth. It just trains people to either not buy games, which is bad because, you know, if you make people rely on subscription services, the quality of games is going to drop to meet the budget threshold that the subscription service can support, or, you know, it trains them to just try 5 minutes of a game, which doesn't help them at all, because I'm sure that the amount of time people put into a game game really matters for how much money they get after it releases when it's on Game Pass compared to like PlayStation Plus. And the Arcane founder just kept talking to different people, and he said PS Plus is a much better model. And if you look at them like from a 10,000 view up look perspective, a PS Plus Extra is very similar to Game Pass, but there's one key difference. Games don't really show up day one all that often on PS Plus Extra. Like you get 5 or 6 a year that are indie games that PlayStation funded, and I'm sure they have very generous bonuses for those games to show up on PS Plus Extra, and I'm sure they also have a much more rewarding payout system for how many downloads a game gets on PS Plus Extra. And games tend to stay on PS Plus Extra a lot shorter than they do on Game Pass, and none of Sony's first party games, most importantly, launch into PS Plus Extra day one. So people on the PlayStation side simply haven't been trained not to buy games. There's still a problem with that, but it's not nearly as bad as it is on the Xbox side. And the developer of Battle Engine Aquila had this game sitting around, so they said, hey, we want to revive this franchise. We've got this game sitting around that you can't really purchase anymore. Let's throw it on the PlayStation Store and talk to Sony about getting it into the premium catalog. And Sony was like, yeah, you want your game in the catalog? Go ahead. We'll give you a little bit of money for the privilege to put it in there, and your game will get more resurgence in people's mindshare, which is ultimately what the publisher and developer of the game wants. So I could see this being a really good path for developers in the future, like say Capcom, if they want to gauge interest on the Dino Crisis franchise, because you know, people love begging for Dino Crisis on Twitter, but Twitter isn't real life. If you make a game based on what people are begging for on Twitter, 9 times out of 10, I would say people don't actually show up to buy the game. So if Capcom wants some actual data, they could say take the PS1 release of Dino Crisis 1 and Dino Crisis 2, add it to the PS Plus premium catalog, and just look at how many people actually go ahead and download the game. Now it is a little bit flawed because if you subscribe to premium, that's a free download, and some of the games that they've added have not been in the classics catalog. Like I'm pretty sure the first Resident Evil Director's Cut was not. You had to just buy it on the PlayStation Store, but still, I'd say that's good data to gauge interest into how many people would be excited to play a remake or a remaster of Dino Crisis 1 and 2 in a similar vein to how they did Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4. But that brings me to the third news story here, which is about Capcom, my favorite publisher, really. I mean, they're making great stuff, whether it's Resident Evil, Onimusha, Monster Hunter, Dragon's Dogma. They just make great stuff like Devil May Cry. I love Capcom. I always have. My favorite game of all time is Resident Evil 4, but I gotta criticize them a little bit for their game performance. People are basically at their breaking point with how badly Capcom games are performing, but do not take it to the level that these people did. So Capcom was scheduled to give a talk at CEDEC, which is the big game developer conference that happens over in Japan, and the talk was titled Monster Hunter Wilds Runs Smoothly! Everything you need to know about optimization. Now, anyone with a pulse who's spent 5 or 6 minutes playing Monster Hunter Wilds can tell you it does not run smoothly. It has bad pop-in issues, the frame rate is all over the place no matter which graphics mode you're playing in, and just like every time they patch it, it breaks the performance of certain features no matter what. So people are essentially reaching their breaking point, and it's kind of insane to think that these executives at Capcom or even the developers think that by any stretch of the word their game runs smoothly, because even by like mid-grade standards, like it outperforms games on Unreal Engine 5, but that's no high bar to clear, and it doesn't run smoothly. That's the whole point I'm trying to make here. No matter whether you're on PS5 or PS5 Pro, the game just simply runs like crap, very similarly to something like Dragon's Dogma 2. So coinciding with this talk came Title Update 2 for Monster Hunter Wilds, and I guess it broke some features in the game, which, like, shocker, like I just mentioned, it breaks every time they update it, and apparently they got threats from the community that were bad enough that they had to just cancel the talk. Now, I was not able to find these actual threats, so if it was like making fun of them for giving a talk about optimization and how great their game runs when they're breaking features and the core product does not run well at all, I think that's totally reasonable, and they kind of hit people back and said, look, we accept criticism of our games, but if you're going to the level of libel and slander, then we're going to have a massive problem. So I'm starting to think that maybe the community went a little bit overboard with their criticisms, but regardless, I think this ultimately, while bad if these people went way overboard with their criticism, should be a wake-up call for Capcom. Like, by your standard, maybe it runs smoothly, like, you know, the game functions, but by most people's standards, we bought the PlayStation 5 for 4K 60 FPS gameplay. That's what was advertised by Sony. That's what developers were glazing it for over time. And while, yeah, we did get a lot of cross-generational games, ironically from Capcom, like RE4, Village 7, 2, and 3, that all run amazing. Like, if you have a PS5 Pro, the ray tracing version of Resident Evil 2 Remake can run at a locked 120 FPS, and it looks phenomenal. That's not what we're getting with the games that actually just support PlayStation 5. So it's just crazy. Like, I don't know what the issue is, because they have games that look and run phenomenally. All the Resident Evil games, Devil May Cry 5, like, I play that on my Steam Deck and it's like the hardest locked 60 FPS ever. The same goes for every Resident Evil game I've tried out, even the newer ones like Resident Evil 4. The lowest it goes is 30 FPS at medium high settings. Like, it shouldn't be that crazy to run a game like Dragon's Dogma 2 or Monster Hunter Wilds. So maybe it's just the engine. Like, maybe the engine is not built for open area or open world content, and that's the hurdle they need to cross. But they should cross it. They should figure it out, because I think it's pretty unacceptable that A, Dragon's Dogma and Monster Hunter Wilds released in the state that they did, and B, both games kind of focused on extra content that was cut out of the game coming after launch instead of actually fixing performance. So yeah, you can sit there and reap the rewards of your high selling franchise for sure, but don't try to gaslight people into thinking it runs well, because obviously that's going to upset them. It does seem like the core performance wasn't the impetus for all of this. It was mostly the title update 2 breaking things, but still, when you look at how great Monster Hunter World was, it sucks to see how big of a mess Monster Hunter Wilds has turned out to be. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you in today's video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.